In this video, I'm going to show you how you can set up a report for one country and update the whole deck in a couple of clicks for another country with our switch data feature. This concept can be applied to any report type where you need the same deck for different audiences, international research being the most obvious, but perhaps you need a deck per segment, age group, job title, and so on. Equally, perhaps you need one report per brand or cell in your research. It's worth noting that the length of the report doesn't really matter. We're focusing on scorecards here to keep it short and sweet, but the same workflow can be applied to longer decks too. Coming to the benefits, the big benefit here is time saved. If you're only setting up the report once and refreshing the data, you're going to save yourself a whole heap of time and effort, especially if you need that same report for, say, 20 different markets. Something that might usually take you 20 minutes to populate per scorecard can be reduced to just 1 minute per market. This also extends to quality control. Checks can be applied on the master report, and because you're significantly reducing the opportunity for human error, only spot checks are needed, if any, on the remaining decks. So a project that usually takes 10 hours or 2 days to complete can be reduced to around 1 hour in total. Before we get into it, you can download the files I use from the description below the video and follow along, pausing the video when you need to. I will also touch on a few core features within SlideGen as we progress through, so this will serve as a good training video for you and your team before you attempt to implement this process on a real project. Today we'll touch on uploading your report and data, mapping data, applying transformations, copying data transformations, and switch data. Finally, before you try this on your own project, I have a couple of recommendations. First up, you will need to request one set of tables per country, audience, or cell. The reason for that will become obvious as we progress through this training video. Secondly, do you need to get the report design signed off with anyone? If you do, get that done before you begin working with the template in SlideGen. Next, SlideGen reads data directly from your tables, so it's worth checking that you have all the cross breaks, nets, summary tables, and so on that you need in your data file. Finally, if you're working with a longer report, I recommend splitting it into sections and creating one project per section in SlideGen. This is just so that you can more easily manage the reporting and test everything is working as expected as you progress. Let's jump into SlideGen. We need to start by creating a new project. Once we've done that, we can then upload our PowerPoint template and one set of data tables. In this case, we'll start with the UK file. To upload your template, click on the plus slides button here and import your PowerPoint. Click upload file. And we should select all of the slides and add slides to project. Next, we need to upload the data. Let's head over to our data sources on the left-hand side. Click upload data. And the table reader we need is called Questa New. And we'll upload the UK file for now. So 01 Wild Roots Brand Check UK. And hit upload. The sheet is sheet 1. Update. And now we're ready to start working on the report. So let's connect the two by mapping the data to the objects in the PowerPoint. If you jump down to slide 2, we can start the mapping process. There are 3 things on this slide that we can map data to: the charts, the tables, and the text boxes. Let's start easy with the charts. If you click on the donut chart in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see that the data selections pane opens on the right-hand side. And from here, you're just using the drop-down boxes to select your data source. You've only got one, so click on that. Data tables, we are looking for S_gender. I like to use this show table view. Right now, we want to remember to filter frequency rows. That's just because we don't want our base row to appear in the actual chart itself. And then just select the entire total column and hit OK. We just need to repeat that for household income. Remembering to filter out frequency row and select total. And then we can do exactly the same on the tables. So this one's slightly different. If you click on the top table, we are going to map the age question. So S_age. But this time when you open up show table view, of course, we're filtering out the frequency row, but we're selecting the total column and the 3 segments as well. Hit OK. And all of that data has been mapped to the table. And we'll just do that to the table below as well, this time using region. Filter out frequency row and select total and segments. Hit OK. So that's data in our charts and our tables, but we've also set up some text boxes on this PowerPoint slide. We have individual text boxes below camping enthusiasts, extreme adventurers, and outdoor lifestylers. We also have a text box at the top here, which contains some information about what's on the slide. And then at the bottom, we have a footnote that contains the sample information. Now, one thing that will look consistent across these different text boxes is that you have some text that is surrounded by 2 squiggly brackets on either side. Those brackets are essentially telling the platform that we want to turn that text into tags that are essentially accessible via the platform. You don't actually need to have created these before you upload your PowerPoint template. You can add these in as you're going. But I've thought about this before I've uploaded my template, and I've already decided where I'm going to put this information. So if we start by clicking on the camping enthusiasts text box, in here you'll see on the right hand side in the data selections, you now have an XX. And from here you can select your data source and your table, which in this case is going to be S_WR_segment. Instead of mapping an entire row here, we're just going to select the cell in the total column for camping enthusiasts, 38%, and hit OK. And that percentage has now been mapped to that text box. And then we can repeat that process for extreme adventurers, reload the last table and select 27%. And then the same for outdoor lifestylers, 35%. The slide title is a little bit different because we're actually going to pull that information from the metadata surrounding one of the tables. So if you just reload your last table and then click on the drop down selecting S_country, if you open up that table view now, you'll see that above the table we actually have a job title and a table title. The job title says UK. If you select that and hit OK, that's actually going to pull that information into this slide for us. And similarly, with the base tag, you can actually populate the sample size from the table as well. So if you reload the last table, you can see that we have 2,334 respondents in total. You can actually select that cell and hit OK, and our sample size is now updated in the footnote as well. So that's everything on this slide now mapped, ready to move on to slide number 3. Coming down to brand metrics, we're going to repeat the process of mapping data, but then I'm going to introduce you to some transformations. So first up, if you click on the unaided awareness chart, reload your last table, and then come down to select Q1_A, thinking of the brands that offer camping equipment and outdoor clothing, which brands come to mind. This is our unaided awareness question. And again here, we're just selecting the total column, remembering to filter out the frequency row. Now, we just want to do the same for aided awareness, which is Q1. Purchased in the past year, which is Q2. and consider in the next 6 months, which is Q3. We'll come to association a little bit later on. First up, I'm going to introduce you to some transformations. What we actually want to show in each of these charts is wild roots plus the top 5 competitors in that category. The top 5 might be different for unaided awareness, aided awareness, purchased in the past year, and consideration. So we're going to run through some transformations that just make our lives a little bit easier. On the far right hand side here, you have a button for data transformations. There's a number of different things that you can do in here, and I recommend kind of playing around with these and getting a feel for what each of them can do. We are going to use the sort by feature to sort on the columns by total, and we want that to be descending. So we just hit OK, and that essentially puts our response options from high to low. Now you can see that first up, none of these is in the mix, and we really don't want it to be there. And then we also have wild roots kind of halfway through the middle of the chart. We just want to pin that to the top. And finally, we have way too many answer options in here. We only want to show wild roots plus the top 5 competitors. So we're going to start by getting rid of none of these using the filter by text search. And you want to look through the rows, filtering by the term none, where the text is at the beginning of the label, and then we want to remove those rows. Hit OK. So none of these has now been removed from the chart. We can then anchor the wild roots response option to the very start of the table. There we go, that's now at the top. And then we can use the trim function to keep the first 6 rows. So I'm choosing 6 because I want wild roots plus the top 5. There we go. So now we have wild roots plus the top 5 response options. Instead of having to do that again for each of the aided awareness, purchased in the past year, and consideration questions, we can actually, with the unaided awareness chart selected, click on this Copy Data Transformations button, and then select our target shape, in this case, the aided awareness chart. And all the transformations from the source shape, which is unaided awareness, will be applied to the target shape. And you can see here that it's taken each of those transformations, so sort by, filter by text search, anchor labels, and trim, and applied that to the new chart. And we can just repeat that process for purchased in the past year, and consideration. Now, before we did that, I mentioned that the response options might not be the same. And despite the response option, the order of the response options not being the same, everything is correct in here because it's reapplying those transformations one by one, rather than simply copying the order and the rows that are shown in the unaided awareness chart. Next up, we're just going to map data to the association question, which is the table labeled wild roots. Open up the show table view and filter out the frequency row, select the entire total column, and then again, using the transformations, sort the data based on total. And this time, instead of getting rid of none of these, we're going to anchor none of these to the bottom. You'll notice that it is already at the bottom. But we're going to do this anyway, just because when we start switching the data for future markets, none of these might score particularly highly against the other response options. So it could end up in the middle of the chart when you start switching the data. So by pinning it right at the end, we're actually making sure that it will always appear at the bottom. And then finally, I'm just going to map the country information. Select UK and the sample size, 2,334. And then one thing that I forgot to do was add the country code to the actual title slide as well. So one important side thing to note here is that we are selecting all of the rows rather than just the ones that we need, because the response options might differ from market to market or question to question. So instead of looking to select the exact rows by name, the platform is actually allowing you to bring all of them in and then use these transformations to sort out the order, remove the ones that you don't need, and so on, rather than having to reselect the data you want to visualize each time you switch the file. One thing I forgot to do is to give the project a name, so we can just call it, let's say, Wild Roots UK Report. That's going to be our master report. And actually at this point, I'd recommend before you even go on to reproduce this report, you can take a download here, hand it off to the person who needs to complete the quality checking, and ask them to do that before you begin work on your next reports. Because if everything is correct in this report, when we switch to data, it's going to be correct in those reports as well. And actually, let's just hit download so that we've got a copy of this. And effectively, that's my UK report done. And if you have a look in here, you can see that the data's all been mapped, but all of the charts look like they did before we uploaded them as well, just with the correct data in them. So now that we're happy, we can actually go about reproducing this deck for the other markets. So if you head back into projects, I always highly recommend duplicating the report before you switch data. That's just so that you've always got the original to fall back on. This new version is for our next market. So if we open up the project, we will rename it US rather than UK. And then heading over to the data sources, we can upload a second data source, this time the US file. Again, selecting the Questa new table reader, upload the US file, select sheet 1. And then if I come down here, so we can keep an eye on the data and the text and so on. If we click on this button here underneath data source number 1, this is the switch data button. And what this essentially is going to do is take all of that mapping that we've done and redo it, but with the new data file that we've just uploaded. So we want to select the US file, check compatibility, no compatibility issues found, hit perform, hit OK. And there we go. We now have the same report, but for the US data. So you can see how quickly you can just upload the new data file, this time for the US, and all of the percentages update, all of the information updates, even the sample size down here is now 1950. And the same here, our transformations have been reapplied so that if the response options aren't in the same order, anything like that, it's all being redone so we can be sure that everything is correct. All we need to do now is hit download. And you can see this is our Wild Roots US scorecard. Now you can duplicate the project again, repeat for the next market, and so on until you have all 20 different scorecards. Something that would have maybe taken 2 days before is now done in 1 hour.